Good morning, everyone. My name is Kata Bohus, and I work here at UiT at the Central Research Support Office. I work mainly with EU projects. So Cordian asked me to scare you a little bit about what comes after your PhD. So I'm going to present a few it's not going. Yes. A few opportunities that are open to you after you finish your PhD. Now, I know that the EU research support structure can be a little scary because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of calls. It's really hard to find your way in the maze. Even I must admit, sometimes I get questions and I'm confused what kind of call that it is about. But I hope that I can help you a little bit by concentrate on a few things that are especially relevant for you as young researchers. I'm going to talk about 4 opportunities. One is the Marie Curie actions, especially the postdoctoral fellowships. You probably heard about that, right? Hands up, who has heard about Marie Curie? Everybody, yeah, good. Then European Research Council starting grants. These are a little bit more advanced, but I think it's good to keep them in mind. And 3, I'm going to talk about the possibility of joining into international collaborative projects, the so-called Pillar 2 projects. I'm going to explain what that is, and also about cost actions. I'm going to talk about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A, but also if you have any questions or problems during the talk, feel free to stop me. All right, so a little bit of introduction into the structure of the so-called Horizon Europe program. This is a 7-year-long framework program of the European Union. They put about 90 billion euros into the pot, and this is what the EU is spending on research in Europe. It basically has 3 big pillars. Pillar 1 is called Excellent Science. These are research projects that are bottom-up, which means the researcher defines exclusively what they want to research, and the EU gives money for this. This is a pretty sweet pot. The Marie Curie and the ERC are in this one. Then there is Pillar 2, which is the global challenges and blah, blah, blah. These are top-down projects. It means there are certain problems that the EU defines, and the researcher has to give a proposal for a solution. These projects are always conducted not by one researcher, but a group of researchers, a whole consortium. Pillar 3 is about innovation project. This is basically about the commercialization of research, and there is a so-called widening participation, which is not interesting for you right now. However, besides these 3 main pillars, there are also a lot of kind of connected calls, billions of them, which I put a few on this slide. And I'm going to talk about one that you can see in red on the top right corner, which are cost actions. So let's start with Pillar 2, then we're going to go over to Pillar 1, then Pillar 2, then cost. All right, so in Pillar 1 are the Marie Curie actions. There are several sub-actions within this. One of them is the postdoctoral fellowships. These are individual grants. As I said, the researcher defines what they want to research. Marie Curie is about mobility. It's about you have to move away from the country you have been living in. And it's mainly about your research. It does not have a teaching component. It can have, if you want to, but the main objective of a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship is to conduct research in a new environment, preferably in an interdisciplinary environment, and also in an intersectional environment, so with the involvement of, for example, non-research organizations or institutions. It lasts 2 to 3 years, open to any nationality. I'm going to be more precise about this in a second. And it's a yearly call. The call deadline is always in mid-September on a Wednesday at 5 p.m. And the proposal that it requires is 10 pages long. Now, it has been a pretty sweet deal in the past few years because the success rate was between 13 to 17%. Last year, it has been a massacre. And the success rate has gone down to 9.8% because the number of applications has gone up dramatically with 70%. So I'm not going to lie to you. It is now extremely hard to get a Marie Curie PF fellowship. You have to reach around 96 to 97% to get it. Yes. 9.8%. So who gets funded? Who gets the money? Yeah, every 10th, basically, proposal, yes.
The deadline?
Yeah.
In the application, but when does it start?
It usually opens on the funding and tenders portal, which is the central portal where you submit the proposals in April. It's for this year, the portal is not open yet, but you can get your hand on the template from previous years, which is going to change a tiny bit, but not substantially. So about 5 months to get the results, you mean? Yeah, about 5 months. So submission deadline is September. You usually get the results around the middle of February. And the earliest that the project can start is the next year in May. The latest is 2 years after the original deadline. So if you submit this September, you can start as late as 2028 September. All right. Yes.
The same for each panel?
The success rate, no, there are 7 panels. That's a good question. There are 7 panels. The success rate is not the same for all panels, but it's around that. So there are no big differences. This year we have seen it's actually openly accessible. They put out what the success rate and the cutoff rates are. It is, 96 to 97% in every single panel, unfortunately. All right, so there are 2 kinds of Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowships. One is the European fellowship, where your host institution is within the EU or Horizon Europe associated country, such as Norway. These last up to 24 months, so 2 years. But there are also global fellowships. They are 3 years long, and the idea is that you leave Europe for 2 years. Most of the candidates go to Canada or the United States, which is a bit problematic right now, but these have been, yes, the most popular destinations. And then you return to a host institution in Europe for the last year. Now, for the European fellowship, you can be of any nationality, but for the global fellowship, you have to be an EU or associated country national or permanent resident. When in doubt, there are always people who can help you figure that out. I'm not going to go into many details here. Right, so who is eligible? And this is very important. For you, maybe the first line is the most important, must be in possession of a doctoral degree at the time of the deadline, so by September 2026 this year. However, we who are working with candidates submitting here at UiT, we usually suggest that unless you defend before May, do not apply. Why? Because it is such an intensive and incredibly taxing process to write this 10-page proposal. Our experience, which is now more than 10 years, shows it's almost impossible. A lot of our candidates drop out because it's too much to prepare for a doctoral defense and write this proposal. So if you are in your last year of your PhD, don't despair. I think you can wait, okay? And how long can you wait? Up until 8 years after your PhD. So it's quite a big window, and it's good if you can dedicate the summer months at least to work out a proposal. Also, there is a quarantine because there are so many applications that the EU tries to restrict the number of submitted proposal. So if you get 70%, less than 70%, you cannot reapply the next year. All right. One more word about the mobility rule. I mentioned that it is about moving to another country. It means in practice that you cannot have resided in the country of your host institution for more than 1 year in the past 3 years. So for example, if you're doing your PhD here in Norway and you're living in Norway, you cannot apply for a Marie Curie with a Norwegian institution. You have to go somewhere. And this is important because one of the basic principles of the Marie Curie is that you have to get a new network. You have to broaden your horizons. So it's very important that you leave your scientific community where you did your PhD. Yes?
I have a question about
It's okay? Yeah, okay. It is a bit confusing, but yeah, it makes sense. Okay, I mentioned that the proposal is 10 pages long. That is true. The main part of the proposal is 10 pages long and it has 3 parts: excellence, impact, and implementation. Today, I'm only going to talk a little bit about excellence to you, but it has a lot of like little other bits and pieces, the CV. There's also an administrative part. Don't worry about it right now. What does the actual proposal contain? You can see I put the evaluation criteria that the evaluators use when they are reading the proposals, because this gives you also a really good idea about what you have to include. You can see that the excellence weighs the most. It's 50% of the score, which is 15 points, which is then converted into percentages. And then impact and implementation, 30 and 20%. Now, don't be misled. Most of the candidates lose points on impact and implementation. The excellence part is usually very well written. So while that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, don't forget about the rest of the proposal. The impact is about what impacts your research is going to have from several, both for the scientific community, but also socially and economically. And the implementation is about how you are going to distribute your research results. How are you going to let people know what you found out about not only the scientific community, but also the general public. Now, what does excellence mean? It's pretty clear both from the evaluation criteria and also from the template, which is very precise in its subheadings, what you have to include. Most importantly, you have to have a well formulated problem. You have to explain why it is important that you have to solve it. And you have to also give an indication how you want to solve it. The what, why, and how. It's very straightforward. You have to explain your methodology, of course, and also you have to show that you know the literature, that you know what has been done already. This might sound very basic, but I can't tell you how many proposals I have seen where the first activity was the review of literature. No, you have to do your homework before you write the proposal, which is also logical, right? Because how can you say that you are researching something new if you don't know what has been written so far? So very important, do your homework, read the literature. Also, the hypotheses and the research objectives have to be really clear and well defined. What does that mean? There's a really weird, sometimes EU language, I call it, like EU language that they use. One of the research objectives is one of them, and also they love these acronyms like SMART that you can see. They have to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. Whatever, what is important, that of course you have to think about your project as kind of a triangle or a pyramid. Of course, you have one big main research objective, what you want to achieve with these 2 years. But of course, you have to define the steps as well, the key objectives, how you are going to reach this one most important objectives. And of course, you will have your scientific objectives, which are closely connected to these, but because you have other tasks relating to your research, such as communicating it and distributing it, you will also have communication objectives. Now, Marie Curie, as I said, is also about mobility, which means you have to demonstrate that through the research that you will conduct during your project, you will also receive important training that you lack so far. This can be on-the-spot training, but this also means you can take courses. For example, if you want to learn a new methodology that you cannot learn at your or university where you are doing your PhD, but you want to use it for your postdoc, you have to find a host institution that offers, for example, courses or labs or infrastructure that teach you where you can learn that new methodology. But this can be anything else, any kind of new skill that you do not have now, but you need for the execution of your postdoctoral project. And I would like to very much emphasize that when you write a proposal, you don't have to show that you know everything already, because the point is that you get the training. So don't be afraid to point out, well, this is my research objective, one of them. I'm lacking this skill for that. However, I'm going to this host institution because there I can learn this skill. That is totally fine, and this is actually what they are looking for. All right. If you are not at UiT, I know you are coming from several countries, right? We do have a pretty extensive program for those candidates who want to come to UiT to do their Marie Curie projects. It is pretty tough. I'm not going to lie. The good news is we have really good results, and also, especially lately, the mathematics department has been doing really, really well. They have several candidates, and they also have now new candidates coming in. But from this structure, you can see how much time it requires to work out this proposal. So you cannot write a Marie Curie in 2 weeks. I'm sorry. It will take months. And this is something that it's perhaps good to keep in mind as you are approaching the end of your PhD. If you have any ideas that pop in your head, but you cannot include them into your dissertation because it's kind of a divergence, write them down, have a file. I had a file that was called Future Projects. And then just pop them in, because your postdoctoral project might grow out of one of those ideas. Also, how do you find a potential supervisor who can be your guidance during a postdoctoral fellowship? If you read something that is really inspiring or this is really helpful, note down the name. Look up that researcher. You might end up writing to them to be your supervisor for your Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship. If you go to conferences and you hear a really inspiring talk, also talk to those researchers. It's really good to work your networks to find out who you can work with during a postdoctoral fellowship and there. All right. Next is the ERC starting grant. That is another option. I did say that this is maybe a little bit more advanced. Although officially you can apply for a starting grant right as you finish your PhD, here I would also suggest you wait a little bit. I will show you why. So what is the ERC? The ERC stands for European Research Council. And this kind of funding really found high potential projects, high risk, high gain projects. So they are really groundbreaking studies. Sometimes they end up not confirming the original hypothesis, and that is okay. That's the high risk part. But it really is only for the best of the best. It is fully investigator-driven, which means, again, it is the researcher who defines what they want to research. And it has been really successful in that there is a clear correlation between Nobel Prize winners and ERC grantees. So somebody who gets an ERC, there are several Nobel Prize winners who have been granted ERC grants. There are 2 of them from the past 3 years who has had ERC grants, but not ERC grantees get Nobel Prizes, however. So what are the guiding principles? There is also, again, one host institution, and that can be anywhere. That can be where you are working right now. Like we have ERC grantees who have done their postdocs here, who have started working here, and then they brought their ERCs here. However, if you change institutions where you are doing your project, you can take your projects with you, which means that when somebody gets granted an ERC, they frequently get nice emails soliciting whether they want to move to another institution. And that's why a lot of institutions also have extra incentives for those who get awarded an ERC. They get, I don't know, an extra postdoc position or extra money or something like that. It can be, again, any field of research. Here, just like in the Marie Curie, there are several panels, so you are not competing with somebody, of course, from the humanities. You are only competing within your research field. The ERC, however, is, of course, Europe-bound. You have to stay in Europe or in an associated country, conduct your research. There are several grant types. What is relevant for you is the starting grant. So far, it has been 2 to 7 years after PhD. They are just changing that from 2027. So those applicants who apply this year already can be between 0 and 10 years after finishing PhD. They did that to reflect the change in career. Several people, right, spend several years doing several postdocs. So they wanted to kind of expand that window. The starting grant is 1.5 million euros. So that's a pretty big pot of money. It usually does include a couple of doctoral researchers as well that you can hire as the principal investigator. You are the principal investigator, so you can hire a doctoral researcher or a postdoc or something like that, and it can be extended as well, and then you get an extra pot of money. The time, working time that it requires from the principal investigator is 50%. So you have to spend 50% of your time during the project, which is 5 years, working on the ERC. Again, a few words about the proposal structure and how it's evaluated. It's a little bit difficult and tricky, but it is also kind of tailored to minimize the work of the evaluators. So there are here too B1 and B2 parts of the proposal, but this proposal, as opposed to the Marie Curie, which is also about implementation and communication, this is only about science. So all you describe in the proposal, which is 7 + 5 pages, is the science that you want to do, the research that you want to do, and the objectives that you would like to reach. There is nothing about how you're going to communicate it, how many papers are going to publish, how many conferences you're going to present it on. It's all not needed in the ERC. It's only pure research. Now, you have to submit everything at the same time, but they don't read everything at the same time. It's possible, if you don't get through the first round, that you worked for nothing. But yeah, that's the system. So you have to submit a short synopsis, which is 5 pages long. Yes? I'm just going to tell you just a second. I'm going to tell you what they read. So you have to submit an extended synopsis, which is basically what is the scientific problem that you are going to address and what is your ambition. Why is this high risk, high gain, as I mentioned? So in the synopsis, you have to convince the evaluators that this is something that's interesting, this is something that is worth reading forward. Now, in the first step, this is what you asked, they are going to read this synopsis and they're going to take a look at your CV and your track record, basically what you have done so far. These first step evaluators are generalists. So they are from your field, but they are not experts in the little specific subfield that you are working, which also means that the synopsis has to be like generally clear and understandable for those who are not working with the specific methodologies and problems that you are working with. They're going to read this, they're going to take a look at the CV, and then they're going to give a letter, A, B, or C. Those who receive letter A go forward to the next step. Those who receive B are blocked for a year, and those who receive C are blocked for 2 years. Now, in the second step, they take this synopsis, the CV, and they also take the 7 pages of the scientific proposal that you also submitted but has not been read yet, and they're going to read all these. Now, this 7-page long, by the way, this is new, it has been 14, and I'm sorry, I made a mistake in the next slide, I didn't modify. So it used to be 14 pages, now it's down to 7. Here, you describe your methodology, and you describe how you are going to address the scientific issue that you described in your synopsis. In other words, you describe all your research objectives, not just the general goal of the research, and also how you're going to reach those. There is also a budget in this, but the budget is actually not too hard to do. It's kind of, yeah, and there are also usually people at the university who can help you with that. So this is the step 2. Here, the evaluators are not only generalists, but also specialists. So this is when the proposal is going to be given to one of the big names in your field, and they are going to read it and scrutinize it. The ERC process also includes an interview in Brussels. So if your 2 parts of the proposal are still deemed very strong, you get invited for an interview. It used to be in Brussels, it's online now. Where there is a scientific committee, also consisting of experts and big names in the field. You present for a little while, and then you get questions. They are grilling people, basically. You can prepare for that, and I would strongly advise you do, because you get like really provocative and hard questions that you have to answer on the spot. And if you do well in the interview, this is what when you actually get funded. So it's actually a 3-step process. So what are they really? Yes. Yeah. A starting grant, I actually did not look it up, but it's also well below 10%. Yeah, I mean, these are the biggest grants to get. So it is really hard to get through all the 3 steps. So what are they looking for? They are looking for groundbreaking, pioneering research. You cannot just take your PhD and take it a little bit further. You have to look for new ways. You have to take high risks. You have to be able to demonstrate that nobody has ever done what you are going to do. And you have to be able to demonstrate that it is very important from a scientific point of view that this research be done to take European science forward. You don't have to link it to any kind of commercial objectives. Like, it doesn't need to be, commercialized, translated into a product. That's not a requirement, which is pretty good, because I will show you how other grants do require that. It is really pure science, nothing else. Now, who is a principal investigator whose CV is strong enough to embark on this ERC journey? Well, for starting grants, basically what you have to demonstrate already with your CV is that you're independent from your supervisor. You do have your own scientific publications. They are high impact. And you are the main author. So you can already stand on your feet when you are applying for a starting grant. Why is this important? Because a starting grant, as I said, usually involves mentoring a PhD or a postdoc. You cannot do that if you yourself are not independent already and not a strong researcher already. And that is why I suggest that you do, if you decide to do a starting grant, don't do it right after PhD, even though it's possible, because you need to strengthen, you need a little bit of time to strengthen as a researcher to prove that you are strong enough to do a groundbreaking research. All right, jumping over to collaborative projects, because we have around 7 to 10 minutes left. Now, these are, if you remember, in a so-called Pillar 2. Do you remember what kind of projects these are? Top-down, exactly. So the EU defines a problem, and you offer the solution. What else did I say about these projects? Do you remember? Global, yeah? Yeah? Sorry? Yeah, exactly. They because it is about the problem. You don't define the problem. The problem is defined for you. Are you going to work alone? No. What do they require? A what? Yeah. Oh, yeah. What is it called? Do you remember the word? A consortium. It requires a consortium of researchers and or other partners from industry, depending on what kind of call it is, to solve the problem. Let me show you here. It's it's a little bit small, but I can read it to you, how a call like this looks like. All these calls are published on the so-called funding and tenders portal. If you just Google funding and tenders portal, this is what you're gonna get. And then there is a button that is in yellow there. It's called funding. And if you click there, you can search for projects that are open right now. So they're open for submission. There's always a deadline. And there is a title for them. So for example, here you can see, if I could read it, that would be great. That would be great. Advanced distribution management systems, and so on, for some kind of problem. We are currently at UiT working on a project that is going to develop an app for improving the mental health of young cancer survivors. So this is what I mean when I say the EU defines the problem. The EU says we need some smart systems to provide information for these and these market actors. We need a new app that young cancer survivors can use to improve their mental health, and so on. So this is what it means that it's top-down defined. When you open the call text, they define the objectives for you. Remember, in Pillar 1, you define the research objectives. Here, it is the EU that defines where you have to get to. They also define what kind of impact they expect from your project. Again, in Pillar 1, you were the one who could define what the impact is going to be. Here, you have to accommodate their needs. Now, under Pillar 2, there are 3 kinds of projects: research innovation actions, and coordination and support actions. For us as researchers, the research and innovation actions and the innovation actions are the most important. UiT usually applies for RIA and IA projects, very rarely to the third one. Research and innovation action actually is focusing on, and is, as its name suggests, on research. So these projects have a substantial research component. Innovation actions have a substantial product development component. They usually define what kind of technology readiness level the end product of the project has to reach. So for example, in the case of the app, whether it has to be tested in a closed circle or it has to be fully available by the time the project ends, that's what it means. And coordination and support actions are more about services, like developing services that usually like the civil sphere and state authorities can use. Now, there are different roles in these projects. The coordinator is the researcher who coordinates this whole thing, usually works with all the 25 partners, and basically holds everything in one hand. And then there are so-called work package leaders. These are the members of the consortium who are responsible for one part of the whole project. They all usually only work with this one part, and usually not even the whole time of the project, which is 3 years, but they have this part that they have to accomplish, let's say, in year 2. So this is a much more restricted rule. And then there are partners, which are much smaller, which have an even smaller role. They usually just do 1 or 2 activities, so it's even smaller. Now, when you are finishing, and if you are thinking about these kind of very more applied projects, usually you don't want to start with coordination. But my suggestion would be you could very well, even as a PhD student, join into a project as a work package leader. Now, how can you find out what kind of projects are there? Are they interesting for you at all? And who is working on a proposal? If you go to the funding and tenders portal and you put in you can put in a search word, like a keyword, and it will give you a lot of results. You can also filter for what is open, blah, blah, blah. Under each call, there is a button that you can push, which is about finding partners. So you can say, this is my field of expertise, and I'm really interested in this call. I can do this and this and this. Is there anyone who is interested in doing it? And everybody who is already working on this sees your message, and they may be contacting you. But an even better way is, if you see a call that looks really interesting, you can just ask around in your networks, ask the senior researchers whether they are working on it or they know somebody who's working on it. Usually the coordinators are very happy if somebody goes to them and says, look, I have these skills, I can offer this to bring into the project, can I be of help? It's possible that they don't need those skills anymore, they're gonna tell you that. But if they do, this is a really good way kind of to ease your way into EU projects, not in a leading role, but kind of learning it by doing and having a smaller role, having a smaller responsibility. Okay, last but not least, cost actions. Now, if you remember, these are not within the Horizon Europe program, but they are attached to it. And these are basically interdisciplinary research networks that investigate one chosen topic that they define. They usually last for 4 years. And the good thing about them is that while they are active, while they are ongoing, they are open for anyone to join. Now, so if you go to www.cost.eu, it's so easy, you can find the list of ongoing projects. For example, I got this yesterday, predictive AI imaging for stem cells and organoids. You can search for keywords. It's not awesome, but whatever, it works. You can play with it a little bit. If you find a project that you like, an action that you like, click on it, there is always a description of what exactly they do, and they also always have so-called working groups, which are working on one part. And you can join a project and a working group anytime. Why is this good? I think it's a really kind of low threshold entrance into EU projects. Because when you join a working group, basically you decide how much time and energy you're gonna be investing into participation. You can take part in as many or as few activities as you want. Cost activities are very typically conferences, workshops, they have training schools, especially for young researchers. Of course, they also include dissemination and communication activities, so you might be involved in writing a scientific paper or something like that. But what is really good, especially for young researchers, is that cost actions are explicitly designed to help young researchers build their scientific network. And they always include separate incentives that are only for those young researchers who are their members. These are, for example, the short-term scientific missions. For example, in the cost action that I am in, people can get, young researchers can get money for 1 to 3 months to do and go research somewhere. Now, cost actions don't pay you salaries. However, for example, during a short-time scientific mission, you get your accommodation covered, you get your travel covered, and you get a daily allowance. So in my experience, it's a pretty sweet deal because you do, I mean, if you don't spend too much, you actually do get your costs covered. But what is even more important, it's building your networks. You can work with people who are working on things that are similar to yours, but for example, are from another discipline. And also a lot of other EU projects grow out from cost actions, and their success rates are much higher. I think the last statistics that I read is the success rate of projects submitted to Pillar 2 that are growing out from cost actions is 37% higher than the usual success rate. So that's pretty good. And even if you don't get anything out of it, it's a good line on your CV. You are in an EU project, and you can get extra training and extra conferences. Sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, we should talk about the funding. It's a funding for the funding members that create this cost action and apply for it and get the funding, or all the members that want to participate in this cost action?
Yeah, so every cost action also has a coordinator. So the coordinator gets the money, and then they distribute it among the working groups. And then as a member of a working group, you can get your costs funded. So for example, in September, when I organized the conference, we funded all the conference speakers' travel and accommodation. Okay, they were all members of our working group. Who were not members of the working group, they applied to be accepted. They were all accepted, and then they got their travel covered. So yeah, that's how it goes. All right, that's how much I wanted to talk to you about. It's pretty good. I hope you don't feel like this anymore, like this guy. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes. It's okay.
I have one question about the timeline. So this Horizon project goes until 2027.
Yeah.
I guess all of us are finishing around the end of 2027, probably. So like, is it going to look the same afterwards, or like, or is it no? Like,
Yeah, very good question. So the question is whether when Horizon Europe runs out next year, what comes afterwards? So what comes afterwards is another 7-year program, which is right now just Framework Program 10, FP10. And it's not yet fully defined how it's going to look like. It's going to look like a little bit different. What I have seen is what I think is really unfortunate, which is much more applied research, much more money to applied research, for example, on military-related and security-related issues. Yes, I don't like that. But for example, we know that the Marie Curie is going to continue, and we know that the ERC is going to continue for sure. I haven't actually heard about cost, but I do think it's pretty popular. So I think that is going to continue, but there will be much more money going into applied research than before. How much exactly? That's also not public yet. All right, anybody else?
It's not all possible postdoctoral funding. They are, as you say, they are also outside of this framework.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, exactly. There are all kinds of, not just postdoctoral funding. There's lots of other kinds, but what I was trying to show is that even if it's not labeled as postdoctoral funding, it is possible to kind of take part as a postdoctoral researcher as well in these projects. Yeah, some are more attractive than others. Yes.
The role or how relevant it is the hosting institution when applying for the Marie Curie postdoctoral? Like, is it kind of both the researcher and the host like apply kind of together, or is it like you apply on your own and then you say, oh, I'll go there? I'm kind of attached.
That's a really good question. What is the host institution's role in the Marie Curie? They have a really big role. Because one of the most important parts of the proposal, I didn't go into this detail, but it is to show the so-called two-way transfer of knowledge, meaning that you are bringing knowledge and skills, research skills, most importantly, to the host institution that they do not have, but also that you also receive the best possible match in terms of meeting your research training needs and skills needs. So it's very important. And in fact, there are parts of the proposal that you cannot possibly write without the input of your supervisor, because part of the proposal is showing that you are the best person to do the research, but there is a part where you have to show that the supervisor and the host that you have chosen is the best place to carry out the research and realize your research objectives. You cannot do this without the help of the host institution. We actually have not exactly ready-made panels about UiT, but more or less ready-made panels. And this is also something that I would like to tell you. If you decide for a Marie Curie, always ask what kind of support is available at institutional level. There should be people reading your proposal, helping you. If there is no help available, run, because you're not going to get it. At this point, it is so competitive, you're not going to get it unless your host is heavily included into the writing process. Yeah, another question.
Can you tell us some things that would be like, I don't know, that we wouldn't know but are like good, like seen as a good sign or a bad sign for like the reviewers of the postdoc? Like, I don't know, if you apply for a host institution that has a group that is very senior and very developed already, maybe that's like less favorable than maybe if you want to go to host institution of a group that has a, I don't know, an ERC grant or like a starting that is like group forming.
Yeah, so the question is about if there are any things, kind of any flags that you'd be looking for, what is a good sign at the host and what is a bad sign at the host. There is no one size fits all. There is no very clear answer to this question. However, it is really important that in my experience, I've read dozens of proposals at UiT. What is really important is that there is a good match between your supervisor and you. This can be shown, for example, if you have worked with them before, if you have published together before, or if you were just involved in the same project. That is a good thing, yes. also, sometimes people are like, oh, I have a really young supervisor who is not that published yet. In our experience, that is not a huge problem. We had really young supervisors without actually much supervisory experience winning the grant. However, if you are in this situation, for example, where you think, okay, my supervisor is good, but I need something else, too, for example, one more skill or one more little research area that they cannot cover, get a co-supervisor. It's also possible. So if we sometimes suggest that specifically with very young supervisors, get a more experienced kind of co-supervisor and show that together they can support you and give you the skills that you need. So it's really about the match, much less about, how many ERC grants the research group has. Yeah. All right.
Thank you again.
No problem.